The wind carried more dust than hope across the Nebraska Territory that autumn of 1871. It whistled through the gaps in the weathered buildings of Willow Creek, a town that clung to existence alongside the Union Pacific Railroad like a stubborn burr on a horse's tail. The grass had turned brittle gold, crackling underfoot like old bones, and the sky stretched endlessly above, a faded blue canvas that promised nothing. Mary Eleanor Hartley stood at the edge of the town market, her thin shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. At 23, she already wore the hollow look of someone who had buried too much. Her husband, James, had been gone 6 months now, killed in what the townspeople called another Indian raid. Though Mary had learned to doubt the simplicity of such stories, the truth was often buried deeper than the dead. She clutched a basket containing her last loaf of bread, dark, coarse, and heavy as a stone. It had taken the final handful of flour from her pantry, mixed with water from the well, and a prayer that somehow it would be enough. The bread represented 3 days of rationing, 3 days of telling her growling stomach that tomorrow would be better. The market bustled with the commerce of survival. Farmers hawked withered vegetables, their prices climbing higher as winter approached. The butcher, Otto Steinberg, displayed cuts of beef that few could afford, while Mrs. Pemberton sold preserves in glass jars that caught the weak sunlight like trapped fireflies. "Well, if it ain't the Hartley widow," came a voice sharp as alkali water. Prudence McKenna, the banker's wife, stood nearby with her cluster of companions, women whose husbands still drew breath and wages. "Still trying to make ends meet, I see." Mary kept her eyes on the ground. She'd learned that dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Good morning, Mrs. McKenna." "Harold saw you at the church steps again yesterday," Prudence continued, her voice carrying across the market square. "Begging for charity work? It's unseemly. A young woman like you. Perhaps you should consider other arrangements." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Mary's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. What could she say? That she'd already been turned away from the boarding house for inability to pay? That the general store had cut off her credit? That the only arrangements available to a widow without means were the kind that would see her working above the saloon on Front Street? She moved through the market like a ghost, stopping at each stall to inquire about work, mending, washing, anything. The responses were always the same: apologetic shakes of the head, averted eyes, mumbled excuses about hard times affecting everyone. At the dry goods store, she found Samuel Morrison weighing flour for a customer. The shopkeeper was one of the few who still showed her kindness, perhaps remembering better days when James had been his regular customer. "Mrs. Hartley." He nodded, finishing with his customer before turning to her. "What can I do for you today?" "I need work. Mr. Morrison. Anything at all. I can keep books, clean, organize inventory." "I'm sorry." He interrupted gently. "Business has been slow. The drought hit everyone hard, and with winter coming—" He gestured helplessly at his half-empty shelves. Mary's fingers tightened on her basket. "I understand." "Wait." Morrison glanced around, then leaned closer. "Thomas Brennan mentioned he might need someone to help with his mother. She's taken ill, needs tending. It don't pay much, but it includes board." "Where might I find Mr. Brennan?" "The Yellow Horse Inn, most likely. But Mary—" Morrison hesitated. "Tom Brennan's not the kindest man, especially when he's in his cups, and that's most evenings." "I'll manage," Mary said quietly. She had no choice but to manage. The Yellow Horse Inn squatted on the wrong side of the tracks. Its painted sign faded to the color of old bones. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Mary approached, her worn boots clicking on the warped boardwalk. Through the grimy windows, she could see men hunched over tables, amber liquid glowing in their glasses. She paused at the door, gathering courage like a woman gathering scattered grain, carefully, desperately. The bread in her basket seemed to grow heavier, a reminder of all she had left to lose. Inside, the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. Conversations died as she entered. heads turning to track her movement across the sawdust-covered floor. A woman alone in such a place could only mean certain things, none of them respectable. Thomas Brennan sat at a corner table, his broad back to the wall and a half-empty bottle at his elbow. He was a big man, made bigger by the buffalo coat he wore despite the warmth inside. His eyes, when they found her, were the color of muddy water. "Mrs. Hartley," he drawled, not bothering to stand. "Heard you've been making the rounds, looking for work. Mr. Morrison mentioned you might need help with your mother." Brennan's laugh was unpleasant. "My mother? Yes, she needs help all right. Can barely get out of bed these days." He gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. Let's discuss terms." Mary remained standing. "What would my duties include?" "Cooking, cleaning, tending to her needs, the usual women's work." His eyes traveled over her slowly, like a man appraising livestock. Room and board included, plus 50 cents a week. It was less than half what a proper domestic would earn, but Mary had passed proper several counties back. "When would I start?" "Tonight, if you're agreeable. But first—" Brennan leaned back, his chair creaking ominously. "There's the matter of proving you're suitable. Times being what they are, can't be too careful about who we let into our homes." "What did you have in mind?" "That bread in your basket? Fresh, is it? Been a while since I had decent bread. Consider it a show of good faith." Mary's hands trembled slightly. The bread was meant to last 3 days, to keep the hollow ache in her stomach at bay. But 3 days meant nothing if she had nowhere to sleep tonight. "It's my last loaf," she said quietly. "Well then." Brennan's smile revealed teeth stained by tobacco. "Seems like you got a choice to make. Your bread for a roof over your head, or keep your bread and take your chances with another cold night. What's it gonna be?" The men at nearby tables had grown quiet, watching this small drama unfold. Mary felt their eyes like hands, pawing at her dignity, stripping away what little remained. She thought of the church steps where she'd slept 2 nights ago, waking covered in frost. She thought of the hollow-eyed women who worked above the saloon, their laughter bright and bitter as patent medicine, with movements slow and deliberate as a funeral march. Mary reached into her basket and withdrew the bread. It was still warm from her oven, its crust golden despite the poor quality of the flour. She had kneaded her hopes into that dough, her memories of better times, her stubborn refusal to surrender. She placed it on Brennan's table. "There's your good faith, Mr. Brennan." He tore off a chunk without ceremony, chewing thoughtfully. "It'll do. Be at the house by nightfall. Last building on Mill Street. Can't miss it. Don't be late." Mary turned and walked from the saloon, her empty basket banging against her hip with each step. Behind her, she heard Brennan's laughter and the resumption of conversation, men already forgetting the small tragedy they'd witnessed. Outside, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of loss, purple bruises, and bloody orange. Mary stood for a moment on the boardwalk, her basket empty, her stomach empty, her heart a hollow thing that echoed with each beat. She didn't cry. Tears were another luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she walked back through town with her chin raised, past the church where she'd sought charity, past the boarding house that had turned her away, past the cemetery where James lay under a simple wooden marker she could no longer afford to replace when it weathered away. At the pump behind the abandoned livery stable, she stopped to wash her face and hands, to make herself presentable for her new position. The water was ice cold, shocking her into clarity. She was no longer James Hartley's wife, no longer the woman who had once served tea in china cups and read poetry by lamplight. She was something else now, something harder and hungrier, shaped by necessity into a creature that could survive. As she dried her face with the corner of her shawl, Mary caught her reflection in the water trough. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, hollow cheeks, eyes like burnt-out windows, hair that had lost its shine. But there was something else there, too, something that refused to be extinguished despite everything the world had taken from her. She thought of the bread, probably already devoured by Brennan and his cronies, and felt a strange lightness, She had traded her last loaf for safety, or at least the promise of it. Tomorrow she would begin again, tending to an old woman who might be kind or cruel, living in a house that might be shelter or another kind of prison. The wind picked up as she walked toward Mill Street, carrying the smell of coming winter, of endings and uncertain beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its voice lonely and defiant against the gathering dark. Mary pulled her shawl tighter and kept walking, her empty basket swinging, her shadow growing long and thin across the dusty ground of a town that had no mercy left to give. The Brennan house crouched at the edge of town like something forgotten, its weathered boards gray as old bones. Mary had survived 3 weeks there, tending to Mrs. Brennan, a woman whose meanness seemed to be the only thing keeping her alive. Each night, after the old woman finally slept, Mary would venture out to gather firewood from the sparse cottonwoods along Willow Creek, preferring the bite of cold air to the suffocating darkness of that house. It was on such a night, with frost painting the grass silver and her breath clouding in the moonlight, that everything changed. Mary had wandered farther than usual, driven by the need for silence and solitude. The creek whispered secrets to the stones, and somewhere an owl called, its voice echoing across the empty land. She bent to gather deadfall, her fingers stiff with cold. When she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the night, a low moan, barely human. She froze, remembering every story she'd heard about the dangers beyond town limits. Raiders, they said, savages who killed without mercy. Her hand found the small knife she carried for cutting kindling, though she knew it would be useless against any real threat. The sound came again, weaker this time, from a cluster of buckbrush near the creek bank, against every instinct screaming at her to run. Mary crept closer. The moon broke free from clouds, illuminating what lay hidden in the shadows, a man, or what remained of one. He lay twisted among the branches, his clothing dark with what could only be blood. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the distinct cut of his hair, the beaded leather of his shirt, the copper tone of his skin where it wasn't painted with dirt and blood. A Sioux warrior, far from any reservation, more dead than alive. Mary's breath caught in her throat. This could be one of the men who killed James. The thought rose unbidden, sharp as winter wind. She should leave him, walk away and let the cold finish what violence had started. It would be justice, wouldn't it? But as she stood there, she saw his eyes flutter open. In the moonlight, they were dark as deep water, filled with pain and something else, a resigned acceptance of death that she recognized too well. She'd seen it in her own reflection often enough. His lips moved, no sound emerging. One hand clutched his side where blood seeped steadily between his fingers. The wound was deep, perhaps mortal. He would die here, alone and cold, just another casualty of the endless violence that plagued the frontier. Mary found herself kneeling beside him before she'd made any conscious decision. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 winters. His face, beneath the dirt and pain, held a dignity that transcended his current state. "Don't move," she whispered, though she doubted he understood English. His eyes tracked her movements as she examined the wound, a deep gash along his ribs, likely from a cavalry saber. Without treatment, infection would claim him if blood loss didn't finish the job first. She thought of the abandoned barn a quarter-mile back toward town, where the Hendricks family had kept horses before the drought drove them east. It would provide shelter, at least, but moving him would be nearly impossible alone, and helping him would be considered treason by most in Willow Creek. The warrior's breathing grew more labored. He spoke then, words in his own language that she couldn't understand. Though the tone was clear enough, he expected no help, asked for none. "I'm going to help you," Mary heard herself say. The absurdity of it struck her even as she spoke. A widow with nothing, helping a Sioux warrior who might have been among those who'd made her a widow. She tore strips from her petticoat, pressing them against the wound. He groaned, but didn't pull away. Working quickly, she fashioned a crude bandage, knowing it was temporary at best. "Can you walk?" She pantomimed the action. "Walk?" To shelter? He seemed to understand. Struggling to sit up, Mary slipped her shoulder under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could bear. Together, they struggled to their feet, the warrior swaying dangerously. He was taller than she'd expected, lean and strong despite his injury, and heavier than her husband had been. Each step was agony for them both, him from the wound, her from the strain of supporting him. They stopped frequently, Mary glancing constantly over her shoulder, terrified of discovery. If anyone saw them, she'd be branded a traitor, possibly hanged. The thought should have stopped her, but something drove her forward. Perhaps simple human decency, or perhaps the bitter knowledge that she had more in common with this wounded enemy than with the townspeople who scorned her. The barn materialized from the darkness like a ship from fog. The door hung askew, and inside, old hay mouldered in the corners. It wasn't much, but it would hide them from casual observation. Mary helped the warrior to a relatively clean spot against the wall, where he collapsed with a sound that was part sigh, part groan, in the moonlight streaming through gaps in the roof. She could better assess his condition. Besides the side wound, his shoulders showed signs of a bullet graze, and his legs bore numerous cuts and bruises. He'd been in a running fight, probably pursued for miles before collapsing by the creek. "I'll be back," she promised, knowing he couldn't understand. "Water, medicine. I'll be back." He watched her with those dark eyes, and just as she turned to leave, he spoke. The words were halting, heavily accented, but unmistakably English. "I'll trade you my life." Mary stopped, turned back. "You speak English?" A slight nod, followed by a grimace of pain. "Mission, school, long ago. Save your strength. I'll return soon." The journey back to the Brennan house seemed endless. Mary's mind raced with the impossibility of what she'd just done. She needed supplies, bandages, medicine, food, none of which she could obtain without arousing suspicion. The Brennans kept a small store of medical supplies for the old woman, but taking them would be noticed. She slipped into the house like a thief, listening for any sign that her absence had been discovered. Thomas Brennan's snores echoed from his room, punctuated by his mother's wheezing breaths. Moving carefully, Mary gathered what she could: a roll of cleaner bandages, a small bottle of laudanum for pain, a jar of honey that might help prevent infection. From the kitchen, she took a chunk of bread and filled a canteen with water. It wasn't enough. Not nearly, but it would have to do. The return journey felt longer, each shadow potentially hiding someone who might discover her secret. When she finally reached the barn, she half expected to find the warrior gone or dead. Instead, he'd managed to prop himself more upright, his hand pressed to his side. "You came back," he said, surprise evident despite his weakened state. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Whites don't help my people." "Yeah, well, my people don't help me much either." Mary set down her supplies, lighting a small candle she'd brought. "What's your name?" He hesitated before answering. "Joseph Crowfeather. The missionaries gave me Joseph." "I'm Mary Hartley." She began unwrapping his makeshift bandage, trying not to react to the sight of the wound. "This is going to hurt." He nodded, bracing himself. As she worked, cleaning the wound with water and applying honey before rebandaging it, he barely made a sound despite what must have been excruciating pain. The laudanum she offered, he refused. "Need. Clear head. They still hunt." "Who? The cavalry?" "Soldiers. Yes, killed. 3 of them. After they—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "After they what?" "Attacked our winter camp. Women, children." His voice carried a grief that transcended language barriers. "I led them away. The others might have escaped." Mary finished with the bandage, sitting back on her heels. In the candlelight, she could see the warrior more clearly. His face bore the lines of someone who'd seen too much, carried too much. She recognized the look. It was the same one that greeted her in every mirror. "You need rest, food. I brought what I could." He accepted the bread and water gratefully, eating slowly. "Why?" he asked between small bites. Why help enemy? Mary considered the question. Why indeed? Maybe because I'm tired of enemies. Tired of the whole damn thing. She pulled her shawl tighter. My husband died in what they called a raid. Maybe it was your people, maybe not. Doesn't matter now. He's dead, and I'm... She gestured helplessly at herself. I'm whatever this is. I am sorry. For your loss. Are you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? Both, he admitted with a ghost of a smile. But still truth. Despite everything, Mary found herself almost smiling back. You should rest. I'll try to come tomorrow night. Bring more supplies if I can. Too dangerous. You should not. I'll decide what I should and shouldn't do, she interrupted. Been a long time since I had that choice. I'm not giving it up now. As she stood to leave, Joseph Crowfeather spoke again. The debt? I owe you my life. Among my people, this is sacred thing. You don't owe me anything. I do, and I will repay, somehow. Mary looked at him, this enemy who wasn't an enemy. This warrior reduced to hiding in a barn like a wounded animal. Just survive. That's payment enough. She left him there in the darkness, making her way back to the Brennan house as dawn began to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. As she slipped into her narrow bed, exhausted beyond measure, Mary realized something had shifted inside her. For weeks, she'd been merely existing, trading her dignity piece by piece for basic survival. But tonight, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. Dangerous, foolish perhaps, but hers. The thought warmed her more than her thin blanket ever could. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, carrying snow and secrets and the promise of harder days ahead. But for the first time since James died, Mary Hartley fell asleep without crying, her dreams filled not with loss but with dark eyes that held gratitude and something that might have been hope. The first snow came early that year, blanketing Willow Creek in a deceptive purity that covered the ugliness beneath. Mary had managed to visit Joseph every few nights for 2 weeks, each journey a careful dance between duty and danger. The wound in his side had begun to heal, though slowly, and the fever that had threatened to take him had finally broken. She found herself looking forward to these stolen hours in ways that frightened her. In the barn's shadowy confines, she could shed the weight of being the Hartley widow, the woman who'd traded her last loaf for shelter. With Joseph, she was simply Mary, and he was simply a man who listened to her with a gravity that made her feel seen for the first time in months. Tell me about before, he said one night, his voice stronger now, though still careful. He sat propped against the barn wall, wrapped in the horse blanket she'd managed to steal from the Brennan stable. Before what? Before you became what the town made you. Who was Mary then? She paused in checking his bandages, caught off guard by the question. I was different. James and I had a small house near the church. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. I grew vegetables, kept chickens, read books when I could get them. Dickens was my favorite. Do you know Dickens? Joseph shook his head. English writer. Wrote about poor people, mostly. How they survived despite everything. She smiled wryly. Didn't know I'd be living one of his stories. The missions had books, Joseph offered, but only about their God. Nothing about surviving. What about you, before this? His expression darkened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I had a wife, small dove, a daughter who had seen 3 winters. His hand unconsciously moved to a small beaded pouch at his neck. They were in the camp when the soldiers came. Mary's hand stilled. Were? I don't know. I led the soldiers away before. He trailed off, staring at something beyond the barn walls. Perhaps they live, perhaps not. This not knowing, it is worse than grief. Yes, Mary whispered. It is. They sat in silence, the weight of shared losses filling the space between them. Outside, wind rattled the loose boards, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang their lonely chorus to the moon. You take great risk, Joseph said eventually. If they find you helping me, they've already taken everything that mattered. What's left to fear? Your life. That's not much of a prize these days. He studied her with those dark, penetrating eyes. You are wrong. Life is always prize. Even when it brings only pain, still, it is gift. My people say the spirits test us with suffering to see if we are strong enough for the gifts they will bring later. And if we're not strong enough, then we become stronger, or we return to the earth. Both are sacred paths. Mary found herself leaning closer, drawn by his quiet certainty. You still believe that? After everything? Especially after everything. Otherwise, the pain has no purpose, and pain without purpose will drive a man mad. His hand moved then, slowly, to cover hers where it rested on the hay beside him. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent warmth spreading up her arm like summer lightning. Your hands, he said quietly. They have known work, known hardship, but still gentle, still healing hands. Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with tenderness, since she'd been anything more than an object of pity or scorn. She should pull away. This was madness. A white widow and a Sioux warrior, enemies by every measure the world used. Instead, she turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. Joseph, I know, he said. I know all the reasons this is foolish. But in this place, in this moment between living and dying, the rules of the world outside seem small. The world outside won't stay outside forever. You're healing. Soon you'll need to leave. Find your people. Yes. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. But not tonight. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the barn walls. In its uncertain light, Joseph's face was both foreign and familiar, marked by suffering but not defeated by it. When he pulled her gently closer, she didn't resist. In my language, he whispered, there is a word, wakanyeja. It means sacred, but also mysterious, something that cannot be understood, only felt. You are wakanyeja to me, Mary Hartley. She wanted to weep at the tenderness in his voice, at the impossibility of it all. Instead, she rested her forehead against his shoulder, careful of his injuries, and let herself be held. His arms came around her, strong despite his weakness, and for a moment the cruel world beyond the barn walls ceased to exist. This is dangerous, she murmured against the soft leather of his shirt. Everything is dangerous, but this— His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling gently in her hair. This is worth danger. They stayed that way, holding each other in the flickering light, until the candle burned low and Mary knew she had to leave. As she pulled away, Joseph caught her hand. Tomorrow is new moon, darkest night, good for traveling unseen. You're leaving? The thought hit her like a physical blow. Not yet, but soon. When I am strong enough. He squeezed her hand. You have given me more than healing. Mary, you have given me reason to survive, but I cannot stay and bring danger to you. She nodded, throat too tight for words. Of course he had to leave. What had she expected? That they could continue these secret meetings forever? That somehow the world would reshape itself to allow for what was growing between them? I understand, she managed. Do you? His eyes searched hers. Because I'm not certain I do. This feeling, it was not part of plan, not what I expected when I lay dying by the creek. What did you expect? Death, cold and alone, far from the bones of my ancestors. Instead, I found you. Sometimes I think perhaps I did die, and this is the spirit world. It would explain why nothing feels as it should. Mary laughed, despite the tears threatening to fall. If this is the spirit world, the spirits have a cruel sense of humor. Perhaps, or perhaps very kind one. He released her hand reluctantly. Go now, before the sky lightens. She gathered her things, the empty water jug, the remnants of medical supplies. At the barn door, she paused. Joseph, what you said about your wife and daughter, I'll pray for them, to your spirits and my God both. Maybe between them, someone will listen. His smile was sad and grateful. Wopila, thank you, and I will pray for you. Mary, that you find the strength the spirits are testing you for, that the gifts they bring are worth the pain. The journey back to the Brennan house had never seemed longer. Mary's thoughts churned like storm clouds, dark and chaotic. In saving Joseph, she'd found something she'd thought lost forever, a connection to another human being that went deeper than mere survival. But it was a connection that could exist only in stolen moments, in the shadows between two worlds that would never accept it. As she slipped into the kitchen to begin her daily chores, Mary caught sight of her reflection in the window glass. The woman looking back at her was changed, still thin, still worn by hardship, but there was something in her eyes now, a spark that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Brennan's harsh voice cut through her reverie. "Girl, where's my breakfast? Do I have to starve while you daydream?" Mary turned from the window, schooling her features into the blank mask of servitude. "Coming, Mrs. Brennan." But as she worked through the day, cooking, cleaning, enduring the old woman's constant complaints and her son's leering attention, Mary held tight to the memory of strong arms around her, of being seen as sacred rather than scorned. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier now, turning the world white and dangerous. Soon travel would become impossible, the roads impassable. Joseph would have to leave before the full weight of winter descended, or risk being trapped until spring. The thought of losing him just as she'd found him was almost unbearable. But what was the alternative? Even if he stayed, what future could they have? A white widow and a Sioux warrior. It was like something from the tragic stories she used to read, where love was always beautiful and always doomed. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl, Mary made a decision. She would help Joseph return to his people, would see him strong enough to make the journey. It was the only gift she could give him, his freedom, his chance to find his family, and when he was gone, she would survive. She'd proven she could do that much, but survival, she was learning, was not the same as living, for a brief, impossible time. Joseph Crowfeather had reminded her what living felt like. It would have to be enough. The rumors started as whispers in the general store, growing louder with each passing day, like thunder rolling across the plains. Sioux warriors spotted near Cedar Ridge. Tracks found by Settlers Creek. A horse missing from the Jameson farm. Fear spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, turning neighbor suspicious of neighbor, transforming shadows into threats. Mary kept her head down and her ears open. Each overheard conversation a spike of dread in her chest. At the Brennan house, Thomas had taken to cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table, his eyes bright with the prospect of violence. "They say it's a whole war party," he announced one evening, whiskey thick on his breath. "Sheriff's organizing search parties. Every able-bodied man's expected to join." His mother cackled from her bed. "About time we cleared out the rest of them savages. Should have finished the job years ago." Mary's hands trembled as she served their supper. "Perhaps they're just passing through. No need for bloodshed." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Awful sympathetic, aren't you? Your husband wasn't so soft-hearted. Least not until they put an arrow through him." "James was killed by a bullet, not an arrow," Mary said quietly. "Same difference. Dead is dead, and it was Redskins that done it." He grabbed her wrist as she set down his plate, his grip painful. "You best remember which side you're on. Widow." That night, Mary waited until the house settled into uneasy sleep before slipping out. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and her breath came in white puffs as she hurried toward the barn. Snow crunched beneath her boots, too loud in the stillness. She found Joseph standing for the first time, testing his strength against the barn wall. He turned at her approach, and she saw immediately that he'd heard the news. "You must leave," she said without preamble. "Tonight, they're organizing search parties. I know, the wind carries voices." He moved stiffly but with growing confidence. "I am strong enough now." "No, you're not. The wound will heal or it won't, but staying brings death to us both." He caught her shoulders gently. You have done more than save my life. Mary, you have given me hope. But now I must go. Where? How? You have no horse, no supplies. I will manage. My people are survivors. Your people might be dead. The words came out harsher than intended, born of desperation. You don't even know where to look for them. His jaw tightened. Then I will find their bones and sing them to the spirit world. It is my duty as husband and father. Mary felt tears sting her eyes. And what about... She stopped, unable to voice the selfish question. What about us? You know what about, he said softly, reading her thought. In another world, another life, perhaps, but not in this one. A sound outside made them both freeze. Horses, moving fast along the main road. Voices carried on the wind, excited and angry. They're starting the search, Mary whispered. Joseph, you have to... The barn door burst open. 3 men stood silhouetted against the snow, rifles raised. Mary recognized them. Ed Patterson from the telegraph office, young Billy Morrison, and at their head, Sheriff Coleman, his star glinting in the moonlight. Well, the sheriff drawled. What do we have here? Mary stepped forward, putting herself between the men and Joseph. Sheriff Coleman, I can explain. Step aside, Mrs. Hartley. His voice was cold as the winter air. Harboring an enemy combatant is treason. He's wounded. I was just... We know what you was doing. Ed Patterson spat tobacco juice into the hay. Wilkins saw you sneaking out here 3 nights back. We've been watching, waiting to see if more of them showed up. Joseph moved to stand beside her, dignity in every line of his body despite his obvious weakness. She is not to blame. I forced her. The hell you did, Billy Morrison interrupted. His young face twisted with disgust. We all seen how she's been acting. Traitor and a savage lover both. The words hit Mary like a physical blow. She saw her future unspool before her. The trial, the hanging. Her name forever linked with shame. But worse was what they would do to Joseph. There would be no trial for him. Take them both, Sheriff Coleman ordered. We'll sort this out proper-like. As Ed Patterson moved forward with rope, Joseph acted. Despite his injury, he moved with a lightning speed, knocking the rifle from Patterson's hands and driving an elbow into Billy's stomach. For a moment, chaos reigned in the small barn. Run! Joseph shouted at Mary, grappling with the sheriff. Run now! But she couldn't move. Frozen by the terrible ballet of violence, the sheriff's rifle went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Joseph staggered but didn't fall, his hands still fighting for the weapon. Then Billy Morrison, recovered from the blow, raised his own rifle. No! Mary threw herself forward, but too late. The second shot echoed like thunder. Joseph spun and fell, new blood blooming across his shirt. Mary dropped beside him, her hands desperately trying to stem the flow. Stupid woman, Patterson growled, rubbing his bruised jaw. Could have been simple. Now look what you done. Joseph's eyes found hers, already glazing with shock. He tried to speak, blood bubbling on his lips. She leaned close, tears streaming down her face. I'll trade you, my life, he whispered, echoing his first words to her. Remember, you are Wakanyeja. Get her up, the sheriff ordered, his voice shaken. This has gone far enough. Rough hands pulled Mary away from Joseph's still form. She fought them, wild with grief, but they were too strong. As they dragged her from the barn, she looked back to see him lying in the hay where she'd first tended him, the circle of their story closing in blood and sorrow. The journey back to town passed in a blur. Mary was vaguely aware of being thrown into the back of a wagon, of voices arguing about what to do with her. Some wanted immediate justice, a rope and the nearest tree. Others, including the sheriff, insisted on proper procedures. They locked her in the storeroom behind the jail, the same place they'd once kept captured raiders before transport. The irony wasn't lost on her. Through the small barred window, she could see townspeople gathering, their faces ugly with righteous anger. Prudence McKenna's voice rose above the crowd. I always knew she was no good, Probably been conspiring with them savages all along. Thomas Brennan was there too, shouting about how she'd stolen supplies from his house. Medicine and food, right under our noses. Probably told them all about our defenses too. Mary sank onto the wooden bench, feeling hollow as a gourd. Joseph was dead. The word echoed in her mind, impossible to fully grasp. That vital, dignified man who'd shown her tenderness in the midst of brutality, who'd called her sacred, gone, erased by fear and hatred. She thought of his wife and daughter, somewhere in the vast wilderness, perhaps alive, perhaps not. Now they would never know what became of him. Another family torn apart, another story ending in blood. The door rattled, and Sheriff Coleman entered. He looked older than his 50 years, face haggard beneath his hat. "Mary," he began, then stopped, running a hand over his face. "Lord help me, I don't know what to do with you." "Does it matter?" Her voice came out flat, lifeless. "They've already decided, haven't they? Some have, but there's others saying you were just being Christian, helping a wounded man." "Course. That argument holds more water when the wounded man ain't killed 3 soldiers. He was defending his family. Maybe so, but that don't matter to the law." The sheriff sat heavily on a crate. "You got any kin to speak for you? Anyone who might take responsibility?" Mary almost laughed. "No one. I'm alone." "What about back east? Surely you got people somewhere." She thought of the life she'd left behind to follow James West. Parents dead of fever. Siblings scattered to their own struggles. No one who'd claim me now. The sheriff sighed. "Trial's set for tomorrow. Judge Whitman's riding over from the county seat. He's fair, mostly. You'll get to speak your piece. And then," he wouldn't meet her eyes. "That's for the judge to decide." After he left, Mary sat in the gathering darkness, watching shadows lengthen across the floor. She thought of Joseph's words about pain and purpose, about the spirits testing strength. Was this her test? To face whatever came with the same dignity he'd shown. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear, cold and distant as always. Somewhere out there, Joseph's spirit was making its journey, seeking his ancestors, his family. She hoped he would find them. She hoped they would welcome him home. As for herself, Mary felt strangely calm. The worst had already happened. They could hang her, exile her, do whatever they pleased. She had saved a life, had loved and been loved however briefly, had remembered what it meant to be human in a world that seemed determined to strip that away. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it as he had faced death, with courage, with grace, and with the knowledge that some things were worth any price. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, carrying the promise of more snow. Mary wrapped her thin shawl tighter and began to wait for dawn, holding tight to the memory of dark eyes that had seen her as sacred, of strong hands that had made her feel whole. In the distance, a coyote howled, and she chose to hear it as a farewell song, a warrior's spirit singing its way home. The night passed in fragments, snatches of fitful sleep broken by memories that cut like shards of glass. Mary dreamed of Joseph's eyes, dark and knowing, of his voice speaking her name like a prayer. She woke to find frost on the window and her face wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. As dawn crept across the prairie, painting the world in shades of ash and pearl, she heard movement outside. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, Samuel's wife, carrying a basket. "Brought you something to eat," the older woman said quietly, setting down bread and preserves. "And a clean dress for the trial." Mary looked at her in surprise. Adelaide Morrison had never shown her particular kindness before. "Why?" Adelaide sighed, settling her ample frame on the crate the sheriff had vacated. "Because I remember what it's like to be young and alone and making choices others don't understand." She paused, studying Mary with keen eyes. "My Samuel told me what you asked him. About work, how desperate you were. And I've watched you these past months, trying so hard to maintain your dignity while the world stripped it away piece by piece. I harbored an enemy. Mary said flatly. That's what they'll say. You helped a wounded man. That's what I say. Adelaide's voice grew fierce. Lord knows if it had been my Samuel lying in that barn, bleeding and alone, I'd want someone to show mercy. But he wasn't your Samuel. He was Sioux. He was somebody's Samuel, somebody's son, somebody's father. The older woman pulled out a handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes. This frontier makes us hard. Mary has to, I suppose, or we couldn't survive it. But when we lose all compassion, what are we surviving for? They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the question hanging between them. Tell me about him, Adelaide said finally. Not the warrior they're making him out to be. The man. Mary closed her eyes, summoning Joseph's face. He was gentle. Even in pain, he never complained. He'd been to mission school as a boy. Could read and write better than half the men in this town. He had a wife named Small Dove and a daughter who'd seen 3 winters. He didn't know if they were alive or dead. Her voice broke on the last words, and Adelaide reached over to squeeze her hand. He spoke of the spirits testing us with suffering, Mary continued. Said pain without purpose drives us mad. He believed everything had meaning, even the cruel things. She opened her eyes, meeting Adelaide's gaze. He called me sacred. Wakanyeja, can you imagine? Me, sacred? Yes, Adelaide said simply. I can. The door rattled again, and Sheriff Coleman appeared. Time to get ready. Judge will be here within the hour. Adelaide helped Mary wash and change into the clean dress, simple brown calico, but better than the blood-stained one she'd worn. As she braided Mary's hair, her fingers gentle as a mother's, she whispered, Whatever happens, you hold your head high. You did nothing to be ashamed of. The makeshift courtroom had been set up in the town hall, benches arranged in rows, Judge Whitman's table at the front. The place was packed, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. Mary felt their eyes like brands as the sheriff led her in, some hostile, some curious, a precious few sympathetic. Judge Whitman was a spare man with silver hair and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much of human nature to be either surprised or impressed by it. He called for order with sharp raps of his gavel. This is a hearing to determine whether Mary Eleanor Hartley should stand trial for treason, aiding and abetting an enemy combatant, and theft of property. Mrs. Hartley, you may speak in your own defense. Mary stood on unsteady legs. She'd rehearsed words in her cell, but now, facing the sea of faces, they scattered like leaves. I found a wounded man, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I could have left him to die? Many would say I should have. She raised her voice, finding strength in truth. But I was raised to believe we're judged by how we treat the least among us, by our mercy, not our hatred. He was Sioux, someone shouted from the back. They killed your husband. Did they? Mary turned to face the crowd. Were any of you there when James died? Did you see who fired the shot? She waited, but no one answered. I thought not. We blame them because it's easier than admitting we're all killing each other over land that belongs to none of us and all of us. Angry mutters rippled through the room, but Judge Whitman's gavel silenced them. Continue, Mrs. Hartley. Joseph Crowfeather, yes, he had a name, was a man, a husband missing his wife, a father searching for his child. He'd been educated at mission schools, could quote scripture better than most here. He was gentle and dignified and treated me with more respect than I've received from my own kind since my husband died. You speak of him with unseemly affection. Prudence McKenna called out, as if he were more than savage to you. Mary turned to face her accuser, suddenly tired of lies and pretense. Yes, he was more. In the weeks I tended him, he showed me kindness I'd forgotten existed. He reminded me I was human, not just the Hartley widow, not just an object of pity or scorn. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. The room erupted. Some shouted condemnation. Others, more than Mary had expected, called for mercy. Through it all, she kept her head high, thinking of Joseph's dignity in the face of death. Judge Whitman restored order with effort. Sheriff Coleman, your testimony? The sheriff stood reluctantly. The deceased was indeed wanted for the killing of 3 soldiers. Mrs. Hartley was found providing him aid. She'd taken medical supplies from the Brennan household where she was employed. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. However, there's no evidence she knew of his crimes when she began helping him, and the man was severely wounded, likely would have died without her care, which would have been justice. Thomas Brennan roared from his seat. Would it? A new voice spoke up. Reverend Alcott, the Methodist minister. The elderly man stood slowly, leaning on his cane. I seem to recall something about love thy enemy and blessed are the merciful, or do those words only apply when convenient? She betrayed her own kind. Ed Patterson insisted. Her own kind had already betrayed her, Adelaide Morrison said, standing as well. How many of you offered her work when she was starving? How many turned away when she begged for simple charity? She traded her last loaf of bread for a roof over her head. And you all watched it happen. More voices joined the debate, some calling for harsh justice, others for understanding. Mary stood in the center of it all, feeling strangely detached. Whatever they decided, Joseph was still dead. Her heart was still broken. The world would keep spinning in its cruel orbit. Finally, Judge Whitman had heard enough. Mrs. Hartley, I have one question. If you could do it again, knowing the outcome, would you still help him? Mary didn't hesitate. Yes. Even knowing it would lead to his death and your disgrace? She thought of those stolen hours in the barn, of being held like something precious, of words spoken in 2 languages that both meant love. Especially then. What I did from conscience and compassion. I won't apologize for that. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. This court finds itself in a difficult position. The law is clear. Aiding an enemy is treason. However, the circumstances are far from clear. Mrs. Hartley acted from Christian charity toward a wounded man. That he was Sioux is unfortunate, but doesn't negate the humanitarian impulse. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Therefore, this court rules as follows. Mary Eleanor Hartley is guilty of theft of medical supplies. She will make restitution to the Brennan family. As for the charge of treason, another pause. Longer this time. This court lacks jurisdiction over matters of war. That would require a federal tribunal. Given the defendant's clear emotional distress over her husband's death and her isolated position in the community, I recommend clemency. The room exploded again, but Mary barely heard it. Not a full acquittal, but not the noose either. She would live, though what kind of life remained to be seen. However, Judge Whitman continued, raising his voice over the din. It's clear, Mrs. Hartley cannot remain in Willow Creek. For her own safety and the peace of the community, she must leave within 48 hours. Exile, then. In some ways worse than hanging. At least that would have been quick. But as Mary looked around the room at the faces twisted with hatred and righteous fury, she realized the judge had done her a kindness. There was nothing left for her here anyway. As the sheriff led her out, Adelaide Morrison caught her arm. I'll help you gather your things, and Samuel's brother in Colorado needs a housekeeper. It's not much, but it's a start. Mary squeezed the older woman's hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent, covering the tracks of all who'd passed. She thought of Joseph, of his belief that the spirits tested them with pain to prepare them for gifts to come. What gifts could possibly await her now? Cast out and alone once more. But as she walked through the falling snow, Mary remembered his other words, about how life itself was the prize, how even pain had purpose. She would leave Willow Creek. She would start again somewhere new, carrying her grief and her memories like sacred things. And perhaps someday, she would understand why the spirits had brought her and Joseph together only to tear them apart. For now, it was enough that she had loved and been loved, had chosen mercy over hatred, had remembered her humanity when the world tried to strip it away. Joseph was gone, but what he'd given her, the knowledge that she was Wakanyeja, sacred and mysterious, that could never be taken. The snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in temporary beauty. And Mary Eleanor Hartley walked through it with her head high, a woman transformed by loss and love into something stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation and farewell. Adelaide Morrison proved true to her word, helping Mary pack her few possessions and securing passage on the westbound stage. The ticket to Colorado seemed like a document to another world, a chance to disappear into the vastness of the frontier and perhaps find some measure of peace. On her last night in Willow Creek, Mary made one final journey. The barn stood empty and dark, crime scene tape across the door already torn by wind. She slipped inside, her lamp casting wavering shadows on the blood-stained hay that no one had bothered to clean. She knelt where Joseph had died, pressing her palm to the cold ground. "I'm leaving," she whispered to the darkness. "But I won't forget. Not you, not what you taught me. I promise." The wind answered with its eternal song, and Mary let herself cry one last time for what might have been. Morning came gray and bitter. At the stage depot, a small crowd had gathered, not to wish her well, but to ensure she truly left. Thomas Brennan stood among them, his face twisted with satisfaction. But there were others too, Adelaide and Samuel Morrison, Reverend Alcott, even young Billy Morrison looking sheepish and unable to meet her eyes. As Mary climbed aboard the stage, Adelaide pressed a small bundle into her hands. "For the journey," she said simply. The driver cracked his whip, and the stage lurched forward. Mary didn't look back. There was nothing to see but a town that had broken her and remade her, a place where she'd found and lost love in the span of a heartbeat. The journey to Colorado took 5 days through country that grew progressively wilder and more beautiful. Mountains rose like promises on the horizon, their peaks already white with winter snow. Mary shared the coach with a hardware salesman who talked incessantly about hinges and a silent woman traveling to join her sister in Denver. On the 3rd day, as they stopped to change horses at a way station, Mary heard news that stopped her heart. The station master was talking to the driver about recent Indian troubles. "Cavalry hit a Sioux camp up north last week," he said, spitting tobacco juice. "Scattered 'em good, though they say some got away. Mainly women and children, probably halfway to Canada by now." "Any warriors killed?" the driver asked. "A few, but the leader, some educated buck who'd been raiding supply lines, he weren't among the dead. Tracks showed he'd been wounded earlier, but somehow slipped away before the attack." Mary gripped the coach door, her knuckles white. "This warrior, did they say his name?" The station master shrugged. "Who can pronounce them heathen names? Something about a crow." The rest of the journey passed in a haze of possibility. Could Joseph have survived? She'd seen him fall, seen the blood, but she'd also seen his strength, his determination. If anyone could cling to life through sheer will, it would be him. But even if he lived, they were now further apart than ever, she heading to Colorado, he perhaps to Canada with whatever remained of his family. Denver rose from the plains like a fever dream of civilization, all brick and ambition. Samuel Morrison's brother, Marcus, met her at the stage depot, a quieter version of Samuel with the same kind eyes. "Sam wrote about you," he said, taking her trunk. "Said you'd had some troubles but were a hard worker. That's all I need to know." The Morrison house in Denver was modest but clean, filled with the chaos of 3 young children whose mother had died the previous winter. Mary's duties were clear: cooking, cleaning, minding the children. It was honest work, and Marcus Morrison treated her with distant respect. But the mountains called to her. On her days off, Mary would walk to the edge of town and stare at the peaks, wondering what lay beyond them. Sometimes she imagined Joseph out there somewhere, searching for his family as she searched for a new life. The not knowing was its own kind of pain, sharp and constant as a blade between her ribs. Spring came late to the Rockies, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the air itself seemed to sparkle with possibility. Mary had saved every penny of her wages, planning for a future she couldn't quite envision. It was a Sunday in May when her life changed again. She'd taken the children to the park, watching them play while she sat on a bench with her mending. A shadow fell across her work, and she looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the sun. Her heart stopped. The man was thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, dressed in the clothes of a ranch hand rather than a warrior. But those eyes, dark and deep as mountain lakes, she would know them anywhere. "Joseph?" The name came out as barely a whisper. He sat beside her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. "The spirits are kind," he said simply. "I have searched many months. How? You were dead. I saw you fall. I fell, but the spirits were not ready for me yet. Your sheriff, he checked my breathing, found I lived. They took me to the fort doctor." His hand went unconsciously to his side. "I was prisoner many weeks. Then they sent me to the reservation. But you're here." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Reservations have boundaries, but not walls. I left to find my family." The smile faded. "I found where they had been." Mary's heart clenched. "Joseph, I'm so sorry. They lived," he said quietly. "Small Dove and our daughter. They escaped to her sister's band. They are safe in the Northern Territories." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "She has taken another husband, a good man who will provide for them. But she's your wife. Was. When word came that I died, she mourned properly, then did what she must for our daughter. I cannot fault her for this." He turned to face Mary fully. "The Joseph Crowfeather who had a wife died in that barn. I am someone else now, someone searching for where I belong in this changed world." Mary felt tears threatening. "Why did you look for me?" "Because you also are changed." The Mary, who was only the Hartley widow. She too died that night. We are both ghosts of who we were, searching for who we might become. His hand found hers, tentative and warm. I thought perhaps two ghosts might search together. "Joseph, Mary glanced at the children playing, at the life she'd built in Denver. "This isn't the barn. This is the real world, with all its rules and hatred." "Yes, and in this real world, I have learned to work cattle, to read contracts, to move between two worlds without belonging to either. There is a ranch north of here, near the Wyoming border. The owner needs a foreman and a cook. He cares only for hard work, not for the color of skin or the name of God we pray to. You're offering me a position? As a cook, I am offering you a choice." His thumb traced the familiar circles on her palm. "Come with me, not as cook, but as wife. My wife. It will be hard. There will be those who hate us for it. But there will also be land and sky and freedom to be who we choose to be." Mary's breath caught. "Joseph, what you're suggesting, marriages between white women and Indian men, they're not even legal in most places. The ranch is on Arapaho land, leased but sovereign. Their laws are not your laws. And there is a missionary there, Father Miguel, who believes God's love knows no color." Joseph's grip on her hand tightened. "I told you once I would trade you my life. I meant it. My life for yours, bound together by choice this time, not chance." The children ran up then, faces flushed with play, and Joseph released her hand. But his eyes held hers, patient and hopeful. "I need time to think," Mary said. "I will wait. 3 days. There is a boarding house on Arapaho Street where I stay." He stood, touching his hat brim like any proper gentleman. "Whatever you choose, know this. You saved more than my body in that barn. You saved my spirit. For that, I am forever grateful." He walked away, and Mary watched him go, her heart a wild thing in her chest. The children chattered about their games, but she barely heard them. All she could think about was possibility, dangerous, impossible, glorious possibility. That night, she lay awake weighing her choices. Stay in Denver, safe and respectable in her role as housekeeper, or leap into the unknown with a man who'd already cost her everything and given her everything in return. By morning, she knew. Some choices weren't really choices at all. They were recognitions of what the heart had already decided. She gave Marcus Morrison her notice, apologizing for the short warning, but unable to explain the urgency that drove her. He accepted with good grace, perhaps seeing something in her eyes that reminded him of his own lost love. 3 days later, Mary stood outside the boarding house on Arapahoe Street, her trunk at her feet and her future balanced on the edge of a moment, when Joseph emerged, the sunrise lighting his face. She saw her answer reflected in his smile. "The spirits tested us with pain," she said. "What gifts do they bring now?" "Each other," he replied simply, "and the chance to write a new story, together." Mary took his offered hand, feeling the calluses of honest work, the warmth of shared survival. Together they walked toward the wagon that would carry them north, toward a life that would be difficult and dangerous and utterly their own. Behind them, Denver woke to another day of rigid rules and proper places. Ahead, the mountains rose wild and free, promising nothing but possibility, and Mary Eleanor Hartley, who had traded her last loaf for safety and found something far more precious, stepped forward into her new life with the man who'd traded her his own, a fair exchange, blessed by spirits and sealed by love that had survived the worst the world could offer. The wagon rolled north, carrying two souls who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk together toward whatever light awaited. It would be enough. It would be everything. The journey north stretched across 3 days of changing landscape, from Denver's bustling streets to the wild emptiness of the Wyoming Territory. They stopped the first night at a trading post, where the proprietor's eyes narrowed at the sight of them together but widened at the color of Joseph's money. Mary slept in the wagon while Joseph kept watch, their propriety maintained even as their hearts pulled toward each other. On the second day, they encountered their first real test. A group of cowboys from a nearby ranch blocked the road. Their leader, a sun-weathered man named Wade Hutchins, riding forward with his hand casual on his pistol. Well, what do we have here?" His eyes moved from Joseph to Mary with undisguised disgust. Squaw man and his white woman? Joseph's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice remained level. "Just travelers heading north. We want no trouble." "Maybe trouble wants you." Hutchins spat tobacco juice near the wagon wheel. "This here's decent country. We don't take kindly to race mixing." Mary felt the old fear rising but forced it down. She'd cowered before men like this in Willow Creek. Not again. "Mr. Hutchins, is it?" She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I believe this is a public road. Unless you're a lawman and I see no badge, you have no authority to block our passage." The cowboy's face reddened. "Don't need no badge to know what's right and wrong. Woman, you're a disgrace to your kind." "And what kind is that?" Mary lifted her chin. "The kind who judges others? The kind who threatens travelers? If that's what being my kind means, then yes, I suppose I am a disgrace. I choose to be better." One of the younger cowboys snickered, earning a glare from Hutchins. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then another rider spoke up, an older man with gray in his beard. "Wade, let them pass. We got cattle to move, not time to waste on folks who ain't bothering nobody." Hutchins looked ready to argue, but the weight of opinion had shifted. With a final glare, he wheeled his horse aside. "This ain't over. We'll be watching for you." As they drove past, the older cowboy touched his hat brim to Mary. Not approval exactly, but acknowledgement of her courage. It was more than she'd expected. That night, camped under stars that seemed close enough to touch, Joseph finally spoke of the encounter. "You took a great risk, challenging him." "I'm tired of being afraid," Mary said, poking at their small fire. "I spent months in Willow Creek shrinking from everyone's judgment. It didn't make them hate me less. It just made me hate myself more." Joseph moved to sit beside her, close enough that she felt his warmth in the cool night air. "This will not be the last time. There will be others like him, perhaps worse. I know." She turned to face him. "But we'll face them together. That makes all the difference." He lifted a hand to her cheek, his touch feather-light. "How did I find you? Of all the people in all the places, how did the spirits guide me to that creek where you would be?" "Maybe they didn't," Mary whispered. "Maybe we guided ourselves to each other." The kiss that followed was their first as free people choosing freely, not stolen in a barn between fear and death. It tasted of wood smoke and possibility, of two souls recognizing their match across all the barriers the world had built between them. They reached the Broken Arrow Ranch on the third day. As the sun painted the grasslands gold, the main house was modest but well-maintained, smoke rising from the chimney. An older black man emerged from the barn, eyeing them with careful interest. "You'd be Joseph Crowfeather," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Jameson said you'd be coming. I'm Ezekiel Washington. Been foreman here since Mr. Jameson bought the place." Joseph climbed down from the wagon, extending his hand. "Good to meet you. This is Mary." "My fiancée," Mary interrupted, the word feeling bold and right on her tongue. Ezekiel's weathered face cracked into a smile. "Ma'am, Mr. Jameson mentioned there'd be two of you. Said something about needing folks who understood what it meant to not fit easy in the world." As if summoned, Patrick Jameson himself appeared, a compact Irishman with clever eyes and prematurely white hair. "Welcome to Broken Arrow. You're earlier than expected. We made good time," Joseph replied. Jameson studied them both, his gaze shrewd but not unkind. "Let me be plain. I hired you because Ezekiel vouched for your skill with horses, Mr. Crowfeather. But I also hired you because I've no patience for the usual prejudices. My own people faced them when we came to America. No Irish need apply and all that. A man's worth is in his work, not his blood." He turned to Mary. "Mrs. Morrison wrote me about you. Mrs. Hartley said you were a hard worker who'd faced trials with grace, that you can read, write, and figure accounts is a bonus. If you're willing, I'd have you help with the ranch books as well as the kitchen." "I'm willing," Mary said quickly. "Good." "There's a cabin a half-mile from the main house. Needs work, but it's private. Ezekiel can show you. One more thing." Jameson's expression grew serious. "Father Miguel comes through once a month from the mission. He'll marry any who ask, regardless of what the law says. But I protect my people. Anyone gives you trouble on my land answers to me. Clear?" "Clear," Joseph and Mary said together. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. As Mary explored the two rooms, touching surfaces with wondering fingers, she could barely contain her joy. A home. Their home. "It needs much work," Joseph said, testing a loose floorboard. "It's perfect." Mary spun to face him, eyes bright. "Our first real home. Joseph, not borrowed or begged, but ours." He caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet. "You are my home. This is just walls and roof." They spent the next days in a frenzy of preparation. Joseph worked with the ranch hands, learning the rhythms of cattle and seasons, while Mary scrubbed years of dust from the cabin and planted a small garden beside the door. Evenings they worked together, patching and painting, building a life plank by plank. The other ranch hands were cautious at first. Two white men, a Mexican vaquero, and a freed slave named Marcus. But Joseph's quiet competence and Mary's good cooking won them over gradually. Soon the cabin became a gathering place for evening meals and conversation. It was Marcus who warned them first. "Saw Wade Hutchins in town yesterday. He was asking about the new breed and his white woman at Broken Arrow. Stirring folks up." Joseph's jaw tightened. "Let him ask." "It's more than asking," Ezekiel said quietly. "He's got a group together, planning to pay a visit, teach you both a lesson about knowing your place." Mary felt the familiar ice of fear but pushed through it. "When?" "Soon, maybe tomorrow night." That evening, as they lay in their narrow bed, Mary could feel the tension in Joseph's body. "What are you thinking?" "That I should send you away. Keep you safe." She raised up on one elbow. "Joseph Crowfeather, if you even suggest such a thing, I'll—" He silenced her with a kiss. "I know. We face things together. But the thought of you hurt because of what I am—" "Stop!" She placed her fingers over his lips. "You're not responsible for other people's hatred. We chose this. Both of us. Whatever comes, we chose it." The next morning, Patrick Jameson called a meeting. I know about Hutchins. Here's what's going to happen. The women and children from the neighboring homesteads will gather here tonight, safety in numbers. The men will be armed and ready. This is my land, and I'll defend it and everyone on it. Mr. Jameson, Mary began, but he held up a hand. Not a word. Mrs. Hartley, you're under my protection. That means something out here. As darkness fell, the ranch transformed into a fortress. Families arrived throughout the day. A mixed group of Irish immigrants, former slaves, and Mexican settlers, all drawn by Jameson's promise of fair wages and respect. The women gathered in the main house while the men took positions around the property. Mary wanted to stand with Joseph, but he convinced her to stay inside, not from fear, but to help calm the frightened children. She told them stories, sang soft songs, all while straining to hear what was happening outside. The riders came near midnight, torches blazing against the dark. Wade Hutchins led them, whiskey-bowled and shouting threats. They pulled up short at the sight of armed men surrounding the ranch buildings. Patrick Jameson stepped forward, shotgun casual in his hands. Evening, boys. Bit late for a social call. We've come for the breed and his white whore. Hutchins slurred. Hand them over, and nobody else gets hurt. The only people getting hurt tonight are those who threaten my people. Jameson replied calmly. You're trespassing. Hutchins, I'll give you one chance to leave peaceful-like. You'd stand with savages and race traitors against white men? I'd stand with decent folk against drunken thugs any day. Your choice. Ride away now, or face the consequences. Mary watched from the window as the standoff stretched taut. She saw Joseph among the defenders, positioned near the barn. Her heart swelled with pride and terror in equal measure. Then Ezekiel's voice rang out from the shadows. Hutchins, you might want to know the sheriff from Laramie is on his way. Mr. Jameson sent word yesterday about threats against his property. Federal marshal, too, given this involves reservation boundaries. It was a bluff. Mary could tell from Jameson's slight smile. But Hutchins didn't know that. The promise of legal consequences on top of armed resistance took the wind from his sails. This ain't over, he snarled, but he was already turning his horse. Yes, it is, Jameson said firmly. You come near my land or my people again, and you'll answer for it. That's a promise. The riders left, their torches fading into the night like dying embers. Mary rushed outside, finding Joseph among the men already beginning to disperse. It's done, he said, catching her in his arms. They won't dare come back, not after tonight. You're sure? Bullies are cowards at heart. Jameson showed them we won't be easy prey. They'll find easier targets for their hate. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the grasslands in soft pastels, Mary stood with Joseph outside their cabin. The other families were departing, many stopping to offer support and friendship. They'd stood together against hate and won, not through violence, but through solidarity. Father Miguel comes next week, Joseph said quietly. Mary smiled, leaning into his warmth. Good. I'm tired of being your fiancé. I want to be your wife. And after, there will be other Hutchins, other challenges, and we'll face them as we face this one, together, with friends, with courage. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd changed her life. The spirits tested us. Remember, this is the gift. Not just each other, but this place, these people. A chance to build something new. Joseph kissed her forehead. A blessing and a promise. Then we build, day by day, season by season, until the world changes or we change it ourselves. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and awakening the land to another day of possibility. In a week, Father Miguel would speak words over them that the law wouldn't recognize, but their hearts already knew. They would plant crops and raise cattle, would face prejudice and find friendship, would build a life that defied easy categories. But for now, for this perfect moment, they simply stood together watching the sunrise paint their new world gold. Two souls who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward the light, no matter who tried to block their way. Father Miguel arrived on a Thursday morning. his weathered wagon raising dust clouds across the prairie. He was a small man with kind eyes and hands that had blessed unions the law refused to recognize, former slaves to free women, Mexican vaqueros to Irish immigrants, and now a Sioux warrior to a white widow. Mary stood before the mirror in their cabin, wearing the simple blue dress Adelaide Morrison had given her so long ago. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her hair. Through the window, she could see Joseph speaking with the priest, his dignity evident in every line of his bearing. "You ready, honey?" Althea Washington, Ezekiel's wife, stood in the doorway. She'd arrived the day before, insisting on helping Mary prepare. "I've been ready since the day he found me again," Mary replied. The ceremony took place beneath an ancient cottonwood tree, its branches spread like sheltering arms. The entire ranch had gathered, Patrick Jameson standing as Joseph's witness, Althea as Mary's. Even some neighbors had come, drawn by curiosity or support, or simply the promise of Althea's cake afterward. Father Miguel spoke in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Latin, as if calling on all the heavens to witness this union. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence rang like a bell. These people had already stood against hatred. Today, they stood for love. "Joseph Crowfeather," the priest said, "do you take this woman as your wife, to cherish and protect, in hardship and in joy, until the spirits call you home?" "I do. I have already traded her my life. Now I give her my heart." Mary Eleanor Hartley, "Do you take this man as your husband, to stand beside him against all the world may bring, to be his shelter as he is yours?" "I do." Mary's voice rang clear across the prairie. "He called me sacred. Now I call him mine." The kiss that sealed their union tasted of tears and triumph. As they turned to face their witnesses, Mary saw some eyes that still held doubt, but more that shone with hope. Perhaps this was how the world changed. Not all at once, but one heart, one choice, one impossible love at a time. The celebration lasted into the evening. Marcus played his fiddle while couples danced on the hard-packed earth. Mary found herself passed from partner to partner, even stern Ezekiel taking a turn. But her eyes always found Joseph, watching her with that quiet intensity that still made her breath catch. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Patrick Jameson pulled them aside. "I have a wedding gift. The Hendersons are selling their spread, 60 acres adjoining my northern boundary. Good land, water rights included. I'll stake you the down payment. Take it out of wages over time. A man needs his own land to build on." Joseph and Mary exchanged stunned looks. Land of their own. It seemed too much to hope for. "Mr. Jameson," Joseph began, but the Irishman waved him off. "It's good business. I need solid neighbors, people I can trust. Besides," he grinned, "it'll irritate the hell out of Wade Hutchins, and that alone is worth the investment." That night, in their marriage bed, Mary traced the scars on Joseph's side where bullets had tried to steal him from her. "Are you happy?" she whispered. Happy is too small a word. He caught her hand, pressing it to his heart. "In my language, we say mitakuye oyasin, all my relations. It means we are connected to everything, everyone. You are all my relations now. Mary, my past, my present, my future." "Show me," she breathed. And he did, with tenderness that brought tears and passion that made her understand why such love frightened those who'd never felt it. Winter came harsh that year, but they barely noticed. Wrapped in the warmth of building their life together, they moved into the Henderson cabin, larger than their first, with room to grow. Mary planted an expanded garden while Joseph worked with Ezekiel to learn the business of ranching. The challenges came as expected. In town, some merchants refused their custom. Others charged them double. But for every door that closed, another opened, usually belonging to someone who'd faced their own exclusion. The Chinese laundry, the Mexican blacksmith, the Jewish merchant. They formed an unlikely alliance of outsiders making their own community. Spring brought unexpected joy. Mary had been feeling poorly, and Althea's knowing smile confirmed what she'd hardly dared hope. "A baby," she told Joseph one evening. placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The look on his face, wonder, joy, and sudden fierce protectiveness made her laugh through her tears. He knelt before her, pressing his forehead to her belly, murmuring words in Lakota she didn't understand but felt in her bones. He will be born between worlds. Joseph said finally, neither fully white nor fully Indian. The path will be hard. Mary corrected gently, though she had no way of knowing. And she'll be both, not neither. She'll have your strength and my stubbornness, your wisdom and my hope. She'll be magnificent. The pregnancy progressed through a summer of plenty. Their first crop came in strong. The cattle thrived. And even Wade Hutchins seemed to have found other targets for his hatred. Mary grew round and radiant, Joseph's protective hovering both amusing and touching. It was Althea who attended the birth on a crisp October morning, with Joseph pacing outside like every expectant father since time began. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as dawn broke, their daughter's first cry rang out strong and clear. A girl, Althea announced, placing the baby in Mary's arms, perfect and healthy. Joseph entered tentatively, his face soft with awe. The baby had his dark hair but Mary's blue eyes, skin a warm tone between both parents. She was, as Mary had predicted, magnificent. What shall we name her? Mary asked, watching Joseph's gentle finger trace their daughter's cheek. Sarah, he said after a moment. It means princess in your language, and for my people, we'll call her Wikapi, star, for she will light the way between two worlds. Sarah Wikapi Crow. Feather grew strong and bright, toddling between languages as easily as she toddled between her parents. The ranch prospered, and if some still whispered about the mixed-blood child and her parents' unholy union, those whispers grew quieter each year. On Sarah's third birthday, as friends and chosen family gathered to celebrate, Mary stood beside Joseph watching their daughter play with the other ranch children, a mix of colors and cultures that would have been impossible in the world they'd left behind. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. The life you might have had if you'd never met me? Joseph pulled her close, his arm strong around her waist. What life? I was dying by that creek, remember? In body and in spirit. You didn't just save me, Mary. You gave me reason to be saved. You gave me the same, she replied, leaning into his warmth. I was dying too, just more slowly. Adelaide Morrison had come for the celebration, older now but still fierce. She found Mary as the party wound down, pressing a wrapped package into her hands. What's this? Open it. Inside was a book, new, leather-bound, with gold lettering. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. I remembered you loved poetry. Adelaide said, this fellow Whitman, he writes about America as it could be, all of us together, no one above or below. Thought you might appreciate it. Mary hugged the older woman tightly. Thank you. For everything. For being the first to see me as human when everyone else forgot. You were always human. Child. You just needed reminding. Same as we all do sometimes. As night fell and guests departed, Mary and Joseph sat on their porch, Sarah asleep between them. The stars spread infinite above, and somewhere a coyote sang its ancient song. I've been thinking, Mary said, about that first night. How you whispered you'd trade me your life. Did you know then what it meant? No, Joseph admitted. I thought I was dying, but the spirits knew. They always know. He smiled in the darkness. And you, when you gave me that bread and water, did you know you were saving your own life too? I knew I was doing something that mattered. For the first time in so long, I was choosing something beyond mere survival. She shifted Sarah gently, the child murmuring but not waking. I'd make the same choice again, every time. As would I. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the distance, lights glowed from other homesteads, their neighbors, their community, their chosen tribe. It hadn't been easy. Building this life, there'd been tears and threats, moments of doubt and days of struggle. But they'd built it anyway, one choice at a time, one season at a time. A white widow who'd traded her last loaf for safety. A Sioux warrior who'd whispered he'd trade his life. Both had kept their promises in ways neither could have imagined in that cold barn where their story began. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sarah would grow up navigating between worlds, facing questions they couldn't answer and prejudices they couldn't shield her from. There would be more Wade Hutchins, more closed doors, more moments when the weight of being different pressed heavy on their shoulders. But there would also be more celebrations under cottonwood trees, more neighbors who chose community over division, more children playing together in defiance of the lines others drew. There would be love, so much love, enough to build a bridge between any two worlds. Mary reached for Joseph's hand, threading their fingers together as naturally as breathing. He squeezed gently, a wordless promise that whatever came, they'd face it as they always had, together. Above them, a shooting star blazed across the prairie sky, brief and brilliant and absolutely worth the watching, like love that bloomed where it wasn't supposed to, like hope that refused to die, like two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light, creating their own trail for others to follow. In the morning, there would be work. There was always work, but for now, for this perfect moment beneath the infinite stars, there was only this, a family born of choice and courage, a love that had survived the worst and claimed the best, and the quiet certainty that some trades, once made, last forever. The night wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine to share it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like Mary and Joseph connected across their different worlds. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and the human spirit that built the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Mary and Joseph's journey. What spoke to you most? Your comments mean the world to me. Until next time, partners.